photo. I don't know what, yeah. It's like, oh, there we go. I've coined a new term. Apple, you owe me a lot of money. I don't think it works that way, but I don't, if that's not, that should be kind of like.
You just declare it.
I'm just gonna declare it, that that's what it's gonna be called from now on, and you owe me money, Apple.
You should talk to them about that.
Yeah.
I'll definitely be game with that.
Yeah, I think that would catch, right?
I like it. I like it.
Photo. It's a photo video, a photo.
That's actually a really good
New
picture.
iPhone phones that do like,
Live phone,
it like
live
takes a
phone.
photo. Yeah, live phone.
Either way, she's rich.
Photo would be so much better.
Yeah.
Would be.
What's a photo? Yeah, okay, anyway. Okay, so when we look at these items, right, these ones up on the top, those are the ones that the College Board will require you to do. Okay, so focus in here. I know we're all over the place now because of me. Okay, when we look at those and you look at your images, why was it that these images were being drawn in the manner that the cartoonist chose to use? Why did they select that style? What was the cause behind their stylization? What caused them to draw that cartoon? So if you're Theodore Geisel, aka Dr. Seuss, okay, why would you draw the political cartoons that you drew?
It's like a safe way to protest the war because cartoons are open to interpretation. So you could easily be like, well, that's not actually what I meant. And get away with it.
Yeah, and it's not actually like it's not about the Cold War. It's about bread and buttering it on the top side or the downside, right? So, which is later, but still Dr. Seuss, okay?
It's kind of like with the Boss Tweed. It's more accessible to everyone. Like if you show it in a political cartoon, like I know when I was younger I would see political cartoons and I'd be like, well, why aren't they with the other cartoons? And I'd have to ask my parents and then they'd be like, well, you know, this is politics and this is what's going on in the world. So and if you're more uneducated, you don't need to read them to be involved with more daily events that kind of need your attention, like World War II.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about Boss Tweed, right, remember he said that I don't really care for your newspaper, but those damn cartoons, right, he said, and ultimately it was those damn cartoons that were his downfall.
Like, it shows that there's more than one way to like get information out there. Like, some people might not be good at writing, so they're like drawing in a way that they're able to like say what they're doing themselves. Which
Yeah.
is like maybe lost at least to them.
Very good, okay? What else is coming up?
It also brings an element of interest to it because this is kind of like what he was saying, but cartoons are depicted as funny normally, so the funniness is kind of associated with it, so it's a reason to look at it.
Mm-hmm, yep, okay.
Like, sometimes while writing can be effective, sometimes visualizing it and like seeing it can draw more powerful emotion from the people that are viewing it. Like, like the picture of like the starving people the photographer did, like they got this picture, this face of the depression.
Mm-hmm.
So some people that are doing cartoons have the faces of Germans or the faces of animals. Like they're against it, like why?
Now, in doing it, and in the reasoning and the caricatures that they create, do they also then create a certain mentality or belief about a group of people? Okay.
Well, yeah, you can make people like that you don't like, you can make them look stupid, like, the one in our book knowledge where Hitler and Hitler look dumb.
Mm-hmm.
But, so they're like not liking them, so you can just make them look bad, like as you draw them.
Yeah, okay.
I was just gonna, add to that point, like one of the ones that we did, or one of us used was, it was one about the atomic bomb, and, it was about the Japs, and I think they were like, like a monkey thing,
Yeah.
but it's running away, but like, we knew that the monkey was the Japs, and, you know, that's like insulting in its own right. It's like talking about how they're bad people.
It's almost saying that they are less evolved, they are more ape-like. You have to remember that during this time, the American eugenics movement is still quite strong. So it's not like this is something that we're gone away from, this idea that the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant is the more civilized, more evolved of the different racial groups. Clifford, did I see your hand?
They like, it's easier to, with like the uneducated thing, like, that's how you set up, like, this is the enemy thing for them, because they won't go out and research this, because they probably don't have the time to research it, but like with the cartoon that they just repeatedly see of, you know, like a monkey, German guy taking on Lady Liberty or whatever, like that's gonna get in your head that like, but wear the pointy hats.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're the bad dudes, right? Okay. Like, even my 2-year-old son, 2.5-year-old, knows who the bad dude is on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, right? I mean, it's the same kind of concept. You don't have to have a lot of education to be able to figure out who the bad guy is in some of that imagery, okay? Now, when we look at that then, as you looked at your cartoons from 1939 to 1945, how does the tone change in those cartoons? Or does it?
I feel like, in the beginning, they were more, it was more like, we need to get involved, and like, oh, you're just gonna let Germany walk all over us? Like, don't do that. But then, like, in the later ones, it was more like, threatening and like violent, like the things about like the atomic bomb with like the Japanese and like things like that. So I feel like there was like an enhanced level of like patriotism in like my opinion that advanced through that.
Okay, very good. Okay. Anybody? Oh, sorry.
Well, I feel like what the government needed from the people changed, and so like initially they weren't so aggressive towards marketing about like, oh, these Germans are horrible people and all these different countries are horrible and belligerent, and because they wanted to make money, and they were like, well, if we make them too bad, then people won't want to sell to them, and they'll hurt our profits. But then later on, when it was pure war, then they had to like make it more about they're the enemies instead of just a trading partner. So
Very good. Okay. Any other thoughts? Yes.
like I noticed that like the specific artists that we were looking at, like 1930s, it was more of like, we got this, you know, we can do this, we have industry, and we can have factories that help us out. But I was like, in the 1940s, it's kind of continued on. It kind of got to like a lot of what happened to being isolation, like what happened to that, and a lot of like that's what a lot of the comics are kind of focusing on. Which are
Very good. Okay. All right. So then, when we look at that, you should easily, clearly be able to see then too in that the periods that exist even within the period of World War II, right? Because you have 1939 to December 7th of 1941. What's that time period? If you had to give it a name, what could you call that time period?
The US isn't involved.
The U.S. is not involved, right? The U.S. no go, okay? All right? What you could say, it's the U.S. isolationist state. It's the U.S. not in the war. But then December 8th of 1941 to August of 1945, that is its own separate time period. Does that make sense? So when you're talking about that we go from like, hey, isolationist to, wait, we're not isolationist, or when we're talking about this mood of kind of comical to very dark, or this, you know, hey, let's kind of beat up on this guy versus, yeah, okay, atomic bomb, right? Look at what we're doing. Is this really maybe the right path for us to take? Part of that is because they very much fit within the time period of where the United States is at during the scope of that war, okay? Or the beginnings of that war. Now, as you compared them, okay, were there things that you noticed that were similar throughout some of your images, or things that were drastically different? If you had different cartoonists, or even the same cartoonist? They're all the same, all different, or we're just not sure?
Well, everybody has their own differences, I guess.
Okay.
Everybody touches on similar topics.
Okay.
I feel like support for the war in general changed a lot
Okay.
because at the beginning, like right when the U.S. was involved, everyone was angry and they were like, "Hey, let's enter the war." So a lot of the people supported that more so, but then towards the end of the war, people began to just get tired of it.
Okay.
So then a lot of the cartoons reflected that.
Reflect that, okay.
I feel like Dr. Seuss was always consistent in,
Oh, sorry.
kind of, like calling out the US and like satirical, and putting out like satirical work on like their stance and like where they are, so like, I feel like he was never like one of the people, I don't think he ever put out any that would have been like atomic bomb, jabs, like crazy, like that, at least I don't think from what I saw. His always seemed to kind of have like a more reserved, like kind of his criticism
Mm-hmm.
about the US.
Has a tendency to be more like hidden in his messagery, or more satirical in that messagery, rather than being straight up and being like, you know. But he is very anti some Americans, okay? Not all Americans, but some Americans, okay? Specifically, some of the ones that you were looking at, right, show that he very much had a great amount of disdain for Lindbergh, okay? So, and he's not the only one, but he definitely shows a lot of that disdain for Charles Lindbergh. So, all right, any other thoughts, comments? Fun activity, worthy activity, worthwhile, yes, no? Okay,
I like the tune project.
you like the Toon Project, okay, good. All right, so let's get into some war here, okay? We left off, if I remember correctly, Tuesday, talk basically on the brink of war with Japan. Yes? No?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So what happens then is starting on, and that says 8 a.m., it's approximately, it's like 7:55 a.m. On December 7th of 1941, a Japanese force led by, conceived by Admiral Yamamoto, but led by Fushida, will launch a direct attack at Pearl Harbor. Their goal in attacking Pearl Harbor is to defeat the American Pacific Fleet. Now, it's sometimes looked at as being a secret attack. The majority of the Americans did not know that the Japanese were planning to attack American forces somewhere, but our government knew they were going to attack our forces somewhere because they were able to break some codes. They did not know, however, where that attack was going to come, and they did, for the most part, think that attack would probably be most likely in the Philippines, not in Hawaii. But that attack occurs. They launch in order to defeat or to break down the vast majority of our weapons, and in less than 2 hours, much of our Pacific Fleet is lost. There are a total of 2 battleships that have sunk. There are 10 others that are heavily battered. Over the course of it, there will be 3 battleships that are entirely lost to the war and are not able to be used at all. There is over 100 different vessels that are damaged in some way or another. So there is great damage to them. In addition to that, there are 188 planes that are wrecked, over 2,500 servicemen that are killed or wounded, and 2,500 that are killed, and 1,100 additional that are wounded. Half of these men that are killed or die as a result of an attack on the USS Arizona. The bombing hits the front part of the ship and causes the munitions deposits in the ship to explode, which causes the ship to sink. In addition to the USS Arizona that sinks, the US Oklahoma will also sink. It actually goes, it said that it turtles, which basically means that the ship, when attacked, it rolled and it flipped upside down and then sunk. Okay, and in addition to the Oklahoma that sinks, the other one that sinks is the USS West Virginia. It will also sink as well. The other ships are able to be repaired, but we do see that it does become a great loss for us in that. The thing that allows us to be successful is that over half of the vessels of our force were actually not even there. They were out running like maneuvers out in the Pacific and doing training maneuvers out in the Pacific. Had they been there, the losses would have been even higher. The other thing to really note about the attack at Pearl Harbor is the fact that the time in which it occurs. It's 7:55 in the morning on a Sunday. Keep in mind, we are a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant-based society. So as a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant-based society, at 7:55 in the morning on a Sunday, oh yeah, right? We're either sleeping yet or we're getting ready to go to church, right? And so as a result of that, our military is not ready for an attack because we're getting ready to go to church. It's Sunday. The Japanese realize that. They recognize that about our culture and about our society. And they know that we would be the least prepared to handle an attack of this magnitude on a Sunday. Which is why they use Sunday. Okay? Now, some of our men are able to scramble. We are able to get some fighters up in the air, which allows us to shoot down about 29 Japanese aircraft. So we do have some damage inflicted upon them as well. But largely, the vast majority of the damage is done to the United States. Now, it's the attack itself, then, that will become almost like the assassination of the Archduke, right? It's the thing that pushes us towards or finally completely into war. And so, as a direct result of that and the devastation that occurs, FDR, on the 8th, will ask Congress for a declaration of war. And he will state, just wait, World War II, just a little bit of stock footage, and then it's going to get into his war declaration message here in just a second.
Vice President, Mr. Speaker, members of the Senate, of the House of Representatives, yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The United States was at peace with that nation, and at the solicitation of Japan, was still in conversation with its government and its emperor, looking for the maintenance of peace in the Pacific. Indeed, 1 hour after Japanese air squadrons had commenced bombing in the American island of Oahu, the Japanese ambassador to the United States and his colleagues delivered to our Secretary of State a formal reply to a recent American message. Japan has therefore undertaken a surprise offensive extending throughout the Pacific area. The facts of yesterday and today speak for themselves. No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory. With confidence in our armed forces, with the unbounding determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God.
So he goes to Congress asking for this declaration of war, and Congress votes, oh, I hate that it does this, I meant to fix this, and it won't. Goes to Congress, asks for that declaration of war. Really stupid thing. Just go with it, there's yours. Okay, so, but he goes and he asks for a declaration of war. And Congress votes to declare war with a vote with only one dissenting vote. So only one person says, no, we should not go to war. That one vote is the same person who also voted against going to war in World War I. Her name is?
The first female.
She is the first female Congress member. She's from what state?
Wisconsin.
Nope.
Wyoming.
Not
No, Montana.
Montana.
It's like the same state.
Up here.
No, as I'm saying, North Dakota and South Dakota are the same state, or North Dakota and Canada are the same.
Yeah, no, they are.
So, no,
South
no.
Canada.
No. What's her name? Do you remember?
Starts with an
Nope.
I can't remember.
Starts with a J.
Jane.
You're, no,
Jean.
not Jeannie.
Jane Goodall.
Janet.
Janet Jackson.
Janet Rankin. Okay? Jeanette Rankin. Jeanette, not Janet. Jeanette Rankin. And she argues, she basically says, look, the United States, and the reason why she argues we shouldn't go to war is because of the fact of all the people that are going to die. The young men who are going to go off and fight this war and die in the war. And that's why she says we shouldn't go to war. That's why she says we shouldn't go to war in World War I also. Okay? So it's not because she's pro-German or anything else like that. But December 7th then becomes this day that Americans are supposed to remember as this day in which America was attacked for the first time, and it was a day in which America should rally behind it, right? And so we see this kind of rallying cry behind it. You're giving me a funny face like, attack the first time? You'd be right if you're thinking, is that accurate? No, okay. I mean, if you wanted to, I mean, War of 1812, Revolutionary War, which we really weren't America at that point, but, you know, Mexican-American War, like, I don't know as I would agree with the first time, right? I also wouldn't agree and wouldn't say, oh, like with after 9/11, we saw very, very similar imagery, okay, to this. Very similar imagery to this poster right here comes out after September 11th, okay, 2001. That the idea that, hey, we need to do something to stop this threat to America. Okay? Now, even in September 11th, that imagery, and even again, they say, oh, it's the first time that mainland United States has been targeted. Also not accurate, because the World Trade Center was bombed once before, for that matter. And also, during World War II, the Japanese actually were able to bomb mainland United States, not only in Alaska, but also there was a warhead that launched and hit on the California coastline. It actually blew up a baseball backstop. So, yeah. The French, with the catcher's, but that's behind the catcher, that's the backstop.
Oh, wait, like it just blew up that part?
Yeah,
Like in the middle of a game?
no.
Oh.
I was like at night, I think, if I remember correctly.
Satchel Paige with the pitch.
No, it wasn't quite like that, but, all right. In response to the United States declaration of war, Japan's allies, which includes Germany and Italy, has to make a decision. What are we going to do from here? Well, the decision that they make, assuming that the United States will be kept busy by Japan, they make the decision to declare war on the United States. I would refer to this as Hitler's third fatal flaw. Okay? I would argue his first fatal flaw was deciding to invade Russia. Okay? I would argue his second fatal flaw was deciding to spread his forces out in 3 fronts. Okay? So in France, in Northern Africa, and in the Soviet Union. And then his third fatal flaw is getting the United States and declaring war on the United States. Because what Hitler does not know is that the United States has promised what? Yeah, if we go to war, we will fight in Europe first. It was called the what charter? The Atlantic Charter, right? That we signed with Churchill in secret off the coast of Newfoundland, also promising those ideals of Wilson's 14 points, that the United States isn't going to seek any territorial gains with this, and we're going to work for self-determination and yada, 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 right? The other part of that is he fails to realize that, yeah, sure, it's 1941 and the United States is just now getting into war in 1941, but in 1939, recognizing that war was potentially coming, FDR starts calling for America to get ready for that war, right? And so in 39, he calls to Congress and asks Congress for money. And they give him to build up our military forces. And in 1940, we see the Selective Service Act once again come into play for men who were 21 to 25 years old. So we could start training our troops. And he calls for the buildup of our Air Force. And to build up a 2-sea or 2-ocean Navy. So these things have been going on prior to that. The United States, because of Lend-Lease and cash and carry, we've already been giving war materials to the rest of the world. So our industries, lots of them have already switched over to wartime production. We're not that ill-prepared for war. Even though we're not that ill-prepared for war, FDR is very concerned about the United States actually going to war. But an interesting thing occurs when the United States does go to war here. We will see a dramatic shift on the home front, and the effect on the home front is absolutely astonishing. When we look at this from a numbers aspect alone, the United States will go from spending and having a federal budget of $9 billion, to one in 1945 of $100 billion. The United States' money that we spend during the course of World War II is 10 times the amount of money that we spent during World War I. The amount of our federal budget during World War II is more than our federal budget had been from 1776 until 1940. We spend a lot of money, but World War II proved something that any New Deal legislation could not prove. That the United States could literally spend its way out of the Great Depression. And we did. Now we also increased our deficit by doing so, but we created jobs for women, for African Americans, other minorities, for Native Americans, for elderly. All people work, all people contributed to this. And unlike World War I, World War II would not be a voluntary contribution. It it becomes a mandated contribution. Because it is now not just protecting the democracy of the rest of the world, it's protecting our own democracy here in the United States. Okay? As a direct result of that, we will see, although the United States already has an income tax as per progressive era legislation and what amendment? It's income tax amendment. 16th Amendment. Okay, the United States already has an income tax, but still, even though we have an income tax in place, we will see that the United States will increase the amount of taxation occurring quite dramatically. By 1944, the United States will actually have it set up so that you will get an automatic deduction out of your paycheck that will go into the federal income tax system. We've never had that before. You just paid at the end. Well, now, here it is going in as we go. And in order to level out income distribution and also to ensure that those that could paid the most in, FDR increased and had a graduated income tax. So the wealthiest brackets of Americans, the wealthiest people, paid the vast majority of the taxes in on that income tax. Rather than it being equitable or having all these tax loopholes, the wealthy were taxed at the highest spot. Okay? In order to mobilize for war, though, it is something that Roosevelt is not very sure of. But his friend, confidant, comrade, okay, Churchill, tells him, he says, look, here's the deal. Okay, comrade, maybe not the best choice words, but yeah, whatever. He basically says, look, here's the key to winning a war. The key to winning a war is industrial output. The United States, you guys are not directly being attacked here, right? There's no fighting that's going on your soil, like in the mainland United States, where your industry lies. So because of that, you have the capacity to have a huge amount of industrial output. In addition to that, you guys have practice at this. Think about this, guys. 1939 is when Germany invades Poland. The end of World War I, which was the war to end all wars, ends in very good, 1919, World War I ends. So a mere 20 years later, the war to end all wars, and now it's no longer the Great War, it's World War I, and we're in World War II, right? Okay? And if you look at that and look at it from the United States' perspective, right, it's 1941 when we enter the war, right? So not that much longer, the United States has good practice at doing this, about creating and shifting over to a wartime industry. So Churchill's basically like, you can do this, and you have practice at it. And before it was, like I said, it was a voluntary, but now it's going to be a required shift. But we know how to convince Americans to do this required shift because we've practiced with a voluntary shift during the course of World War I. Okay? As a result of it, the United States will be able to produce twice the amount of munitions and war supplies needed than Germany will be able to produce. And 5 times the amount that Japan will be able to produce. So even when Japan hits one of our ships or shoots down one of our planes, or Germany the same, we will able to produce so much more than they could keep up with. So much so that in the shipyards of California, they were able to build a new ship every 14 days. A new gigantic battleship in 14 days. That's insane, okay? But it's because of our industrial capacity, and it's because of the practice that we have. And as a direct result of that, it allows us to turn our tide. But largely, a lot of our production is made possible by these things that we talked about early on. Okay? The United States is able to mobilize because we're kind of in that spot already, ready to mobilize as it is. Okay? In order to do this, though, FDR will create kind of, call it his second alphabet soup, if you will, okay? He begins creating a bunch of new boards and organizations to deal with how do we get everybody together and how do we make this work, right? How do we create production in a more, using the principles of scientific management, okay? And so in order to do that, in 42, he will create the Office of War Mobilization. Basically, the Office of War Mobilization is a supervisory board that supervised every other war board underneath it, okay? So that included your War Labor Board. That included your Office of Price Administration. That included your War Production Board. That included the Office of Economic Stabilization. That included your the Office of Research and Development, which worked with universities in order to try to create the best technology, okay? So, but as a result of that, the Office of War Mobilization will ensure that half of all the production that's going on in the United States is war materials. Now, in order to do that, we have to convince Americans to give up things, right? And Americans like having their stuff. And here we are, we're coming out of the Great Depression now. Look at our economy, it's booming, it's doing better. I can now go out and buy stuff because my income is now on average, my household income is much larger than what it was before. Okay? And not only do I have an income, there's actually goods for me to go out and buy, right? But we don't want Americans to buy those goods because we need that production to go overseas. So, once again, we will use propaganda to convince Americans to buy into this. And in addition to that, we begin to ration all war production materials, okay? That included everything from tires and gasoline to sugar and coffee and flour and clothing. Everything was rationed. And you received a book, a rations book. And if you used your rations coupons, you were done for the end of the month. You got so much in your book based on the size of your family. And when it was gone, it was gone. There wasn't any getting any more of it. Okay? And so what we see also then is Americans learn how do I do without? Okay? How do I get rid of stuff? Kids, because of the need of metals in order to produce more weapons, children would go around and collect their toys, cans, things like that, and they would bring them and they would take them in for salvage. Most children's toys at the time were either made of tin or were made of metal. But that's a strategic material that we need in effort for fighting the war. So children even become a crucial element to our ability to fight this war by them giving up their toys. Even most candy factories made candy using metal rollers, where those metal rollers were scrapped in order for the war production. American women liked wearing nylons, okay? Well, that nylon is needed in order to be able to make parachutes. So what did American women do? They drew a line on the back of their leg. Yeah, they had this deal. It looks kind of like this, and it has a handle on it, and then it has like a, it's not like a marker tip, but it's almost like, it's like an eyeliner kind of a pencil. Does that make sense? Ladies kind of know what guys maybe kind of know what I'm talking about. Okay? But basically this thing then would go on the outside of your calf and you would draw the line up the back side of your leg to make it look like you were still wearing nylon stockings even though you weren't. Because back then the nylons had a seam in the back. Okay? So they don't obviously anymore, but they used to have a seam there. Okay? Yeah.
Did it actually look like it, or?
What's that?
Did it actually look like it, or?
Probably not entirely, especially if you were up close, but I would suppose if you were a distance away, it would. I mean, much like, wearing stage makeup, right? I mean, you can't maybe see that somebody, if you're up close, you'd be like, that's not your actual facial hair, that's, makeup, but yours is, but, but like, if you got back far enough away, right? But if you weren't able to grow that lovely stash, they would have had to pencil it in for you, right? Okay, and then it would have been stage makeup, but farther away, you're not going to see. But American women still wanted to be fashionable, but yet I don't want to take away something that was needed for war. So instead, here's that. I'll just draw a line on the back of my leg. But it should show you something about Americans' mentality surrounding World War II, which was different than any other war prior and remarkably different from any other war since. Americans in World War II were willing to sacrifice anything in order for the good of the whole. I don't know if you would get that same kind of sacrifice from the American people today.
For various reasons.
For various reasons, yes. But I don't think you would get that same kind of sacrifice from Americans today that you got during World War II. But cost of living goes up, okay? But not nearly as dramatic as it does in World War I. Well, how? Because again, the government takes care of that. And they will freeze prices and rents at the level of 1942. So they make sure that the inflation isn't crazy. They ensure that there's not hyperinflation, which will allow our economy to be much more stable through the course of the war, which in turn means that the economy is going to be more stable when we're no longer in war. And the idea being that we don't want to create the same system that caused the Great Depression as we come out of World War II. And we'll talk more about that mobilization a little bit on Monday. Yep. No, just be working on your book of knowledge because that's going to be due on Thursday. I'm going to record lectures again, so you'll just have to go to my YouTube to be able to see the recorded lectures, okay?